I'm an advocate trainee and I'm also an engineer. In addition, I'm a member of the In-Space Association, as you know. Today, although the Poland-France match is currently underway, I will talk about the legal regulation for suborbital flight. Suborbital flight have been a topic that has fired up humanity for many years. Today, the richest can already afford such a flight. It's only a matter of time before a trip to the end of space becomes available to most people. Even now, demand for the flights is greater than anticipated. Few people remember that the development of this industry is influenced not only by technology, but also by law. In today's presentation, we will begin by considering who the commercial users of suborbital flights will be. Then I will talk about what legal regime might be appropriate for such travel and what is aircraft and spacecraft. In the fourth section, I will present the problems and challenges that are on the way. Next, we will see what is the European Union law that is most suitable for Poland. In the before last slide, I will talk about legal risk analysis and why it is essential. And at the end, we will conclude with what is relevant in creating regulation for space tourists. Okay, so space tourists the first. Space tourism has been a hot topic for many years. The first space tourist was Denis Tito on this picture, who flew to the International Space Station in 2021. Today, spaceflight has a much greater potential for commercialization thanks to suborbital flight. The line of Kármán were first crossed in a manned commercial suborbital vehicle in 2024. Since then, we have heard repeatedly about private flights made by Spaceship One and Blue Origin, of course. Now let us consider who such a passenger is on commercial suborbital flight according to the law. So let's start with the astronaut. According to the Outer Space Treaty, Article 5, state parties to the treaty shall regard astronauts as envoys of mankind in outer space. The term astronaut has not been defined in any of the multilateral treaties on outer space sponsored by the United Nations. It's descriptive rather than technical and refers to any person who venture into outer space or who travel on board a spacecraft. So maybe, and who is a space tourist? If a tourist is traveling for leisure purpose, then a space tourist can be considered to be traveling into a spacecraft or space vehicle for pleasure. This means that he or she has neither operational responsibilities nor an employment relationship with the owner of the vehicle or space facility. Perhaps then someone like that would simply be a spaceflight participant. NASA defines spaceflight participant as crew member who are not career astronaut but travel on government-sponsored space mission. The concept of the spaceflight participant encompassed a broad spectrum of space explorer. Then perhaps we should just stay with the word spaceflight passenger after all. That is simply a person who uses transport for a fee, maybe. What we legally call such a person is still undetermined for now. Okay. The biggest problem we encounter in regulating suborbital flights is in which legal regime they should be defined. We actually have to weigh two choices as space law or as aviation law. So let's start. Sorry. If we consider it to be an aircraft, then we can apply international aviation law and the 1944 Chicago Convention, which regulates civil aviation. The convention does not have a legal definition of an aircraft, But in Poland, the definition of an aircraft is contained in the Act on Aviation Law in Article 2. An aircraft is a device capable of floating into the atmosphere as a result of the action of air than the action of air reflected from the ground. So what then is a spacecraft? There's no definition of such a term in UE space treaties. Therefore, one should look to the partial definition of term spacecraft contained in the definition of a spacecraft, but there is one after partial definition of space object contained in the Liability Convention and the Registration Convention. The term space object includes component parts of a space object as well as its launch vehicle and parts thereof. In fact, by definition, suborbital flight could be considered both an aircraft and a space object. Okay. The purpose of suborbital flights is to touch the edge of a space. So it can be said that such a flight will be a space flight. However, most space law was written in the 60s, 90s, and has many unregulated issues that can be considered insufficient for today's realities, including the growing space tourism industry, of course. In contrast, aviation law, primarily as a private law serving commercial carriers, is so much more detailed. Also, most countries have their own national regulation of aviation law, which cannot be said of space law. Another problem completing the decision to choose the right to suborbital flight is that there is no boundary in international space law that marks one's entry into the realm of space. Due to the development of space tourism, many companies indicate an altitude of 100 km as the limit, and it is this altitude that commercial suborbital flights are expected to exceed. This is of great importance if we compare it with international aviation law, since states are only responsible for aviation safety in national airspace. Once a vehicle crosses the space boundary, it would no longer be the responsibility of that state, unless it was registered with it or its citizens were on board. There again, in the case of international space, the state has the same responsibility for state activities as for private ones. And this means that private activities in the space sector require appropriate permits and are constantly supervised by the state. Some of the most active states in space already have appropriate regulation in place to help shift the border of liability to various entitles. And this is really good for them, of course. For example, the US has introduced its space tourist regulation. This regulation exempts the space company from liability in the event of disaster. This means that if there is a disaster related to the general risk of spaceflight, passenger and their family will not be able to sue the company for compensation. In order to take part in a suborbital flight, each passenger will have to sign a statement of informed consent to spaceflight. So what does it look like on our territory? In the case of Poland, we will first analyze European regulation. Under European Union law, there is not only the problem of that law will apply to suborbital flights, but also is in what space they will be regulated. Space, of course, not cosmic space. The European Union in the Lisbon Treaty did not provide itself with exclusive competence to regulate space policy. Space is regulated by the Treaty on the Functional of the European Union in Article 4, paragraph 3, which defines the competence shared between the UE and member states. Article 189 provides the legal basis for cooperation with the ESA and state that the European Union shall develop a European space policy. According to this article, in paragraph 1, in order to promote scientific and technological progress, industrial competitiveness, and the implementation of its policy, the Union should develop a European space policy. To this end, it may promote joint initiatives, support research and technological development, and coordinate the efforts necessary. In order to contribute to the achievement of the objectives referred in the paragraph 1, the European Parliament and the Council, acting in accordance with the ordinary legislative procedure, shall establish the necessary measures which may take the form for a European space program, excluding and harmonization of the laws and regulation of the member states. It's these articles. The aviation sector is also included in the treaty on the functional of the UE within the framework of the Common Transport Policy under Article 100. The European Parliament and the Council may establish appropriate regulation in the field of air transport after consultation with the relevant committees. For the aviation and space sector, the UE has legislative powers. If space tourism is recognized solely as tourism, the UE will only have supporting powers. It is the main difference. At present, there is talk of a high probability of space tourism being recognized as an activity subject to aviation regulations. However, the UE still has not taken a position on the issue, nor that it has determined whether it will seek to create uniform regulation for the entire Union on a right to live space tourism in the exclusive competence of member state. Next, all right, but why this law is so important from a practical point of view? In the 2020 Student Aerospace Trend, we prepared a marketing analysis in our association in space for suborbital flight, and they create a business model. One of the aspects was legal risk. We determined that one of the biggest risks was the issue of insurance for our passenger, our project passenger. In aviation, it is important for every civil aircraft to be insured. Such an obligation should arise in suborbital flights, but since these flights will initially have a higher risk than civilian flights, it may happen that there's no company in the market willing to undertake it, or the cost of insurance will be very high.
We'll have 2 minutes.
Okay, so maybe I'm going to the future. Okay. So maybe shorter. The fact it's that international law is not adopted to develop of space tourism. However, this does not mean that the entire law must be created from scratch. We have two regimes that can be adopted to new legal changes, as suborbital flight is definitely an international issue, and it would be worthwhile to create international agreements that would form the basis for national regulation. Importantly, the topic of suborbital flights is not new, and many countries have been working on it for years. These countries will have more opportunity, and it will be hard to catch up. When regulating suborbital flights, we should take into account that, first of all, it is necessary to create international treaties. Our airspace and space security and air traffic management should be taken into account, of course. The next step should be the creation of national laws that will provide countries with adequate security and create opportunities for economic development in the space sector. In addition, it is necessary to remember to regulate civil liability. We should take into account three aspects: the interest of the state, the interest of the the business, and the interest of the user. Of course, looking at the European Union, it's the most important for Poland. The best solution for business would be apply aviation law. This is the direction the law is likely to go. In this case, it's also possible that the UE will want to have a major impact on space tourism and decide to regulate the industry top-down across the European market. Thank you for attention.
Okay, thank you, Gosh, for your really interesting talk. We have time for some questions. I see first one from Priya. I was wondering if you will also be considering environmental law and the impacts as well.
In our project, when we in space market analysis, we took that into consideration, but I'm today don't talk about this because it's not the basic topic now for me today. But I want to next presentation want to speak about environmental and impact, and of course in suborbital flights.
Okay, thank you. I also want to ask from myself, what do you think when we will need such law? What's the future of such flight? When we start to fly to the space and it start to be a problem?
Okay, so I think we need a law today, not in the future. Because if we want to develop our sector, if we want start to in Poland and in the whole world, which area? It's which area you want to? Maybe I should set our. Maybe I speak about Poland. I guess we need this now if you want to have a suborbital sector in our country. Without this, we never catch up the other states, I guess.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Gosia. We need to go to the next
Thank you.
presentation. Thank you very much for your talk.